This is looking at 2.2.9, define the term systolic and diastolic blood pressure. 2.2.10, analyse systolic and diastolic blood pressure data at rest and during exercise. 2.2.11, discuss how systolic and diastolic blood pressure respond to dynamic and static exercise. Well, we can see at the top here that systolic blood pressure is the force exerted by blood on arterial walls during ventricular contraction, and diastolic, the force exerted by blood on arterial walls during ventricular relaxation. So just by looking at this, we would expect that pressure would be higher during contraction compared to relaxation. These are from a couple of other textbooks. So here, blood pressure, mean arterial blood pressure increases immediately in the transition from rest to exercise. So that's a response to exercise. Arterial blood pressure will increase. The extent of this increase depends on the exercise intensity. So there's a relationship between intensity and blood pressure. The greater the intensity, the greater the blood pressure. When we perform whole body endurance activities, the rise in mean arterial pressure is primarily due to increase in systolic pressure with little change in diastolic measures. So here, whole body endurance activities, the increase in pressure is mainly to do with systolic and little change in diastolic. So again, just going into a brief definition, systolic refers to pressure during ventricular contraction, and diastolic with ventricular relaxation. But during maximal exercise, we can see that pressure will go from around about 120 to above 200 millimeters of mercury. Now, diastolic blood pressure will remain at approximately 80 millimeters mercury during exercise. And again, this is looking at whole body activities or endurance activities. This is looking at a little graph looking at systolic, diastolic blood pressure with respect to arms and legs during cycling. Now, what we can notice here is that the pressure in the arms is higher than what it is in the legs. So I'm just going to go down and we'll have a look at the explanations for this. Shows a clear difference between upper and body. The upper body results in greater blood pressure compared to lower. Now, this is thought to be because of a combination of factors, including smaller muscle mass and vasculature of the upper body, and greater energy expenditure to stabilize the body when exercising with the arms. Now, it may surprise us to see the response of blood pressure to resistance exercise being significantly greater than those during dynamic or endurance activities. Measures can reach up to 480 over 350 millimeters mercury due to high internal pressure within the chest cavity that result from holding breath while lifting and pushing or pulling a heavy weight. Now, this is also known as the Valsalva maneuver and is considered dangerous as it does cause blood pressure to rapidly increase to an extreme range. which is why people always recommend, or healthcare professionals always recommend, that we don't hold our breath while doing exercise. It is the body's sort of natural reaction to increase our breath, deep breathe, and then hold it, and that actually does help protect the spine, but it does increase blood pressure quite drastically. From another textbook, again, it's looking at a definition of systolic, diastolic blood pressure, but we have a nice little graph over here that looks at the type of activities increase in blood pressure. So we can see at rest our blood pressure, now this is looking at the range between diastolic at about 80, systolic at about 120, and we can see that it's going to increase with respect to the type of activity we're doing. We've got our endurance, whole body endurance activity, and here we've got our activities, resistance training type activities, where we're going to be likely or more likely to be holding our breath. Therefore, that Valsalva manoeuvre will be more extreme, as in breath holding and placing greater pressure on the heart. Now, this is a really nice article from Livestrong that looks at in a little bit more detail why isometric contractions, so they're contractions where our length of muscle doesn't change while it's exerting a force. So isometric contraction occurs when tension is generated within a muscle but the length of muscle does not change. There's our definition of an isometric contraction. Isometric contractions are sometimes called static. So this is our comparison between static and dynamic activity. Exercises that are classified or classed as isometric include wall squat hold, abdominal planks. Now, again, this is where they're referring to isometric contractions often involve strong Valsalva manoeuvres, and again, one of the main reasons why, as we've explained, Valsalva manoeuvre describes a forceful exhalation against a closed epiglottis. So we don't breathe out, but our muscles would respond as if we were breathing out. So it's really breathing in and then stabilizing our core. Now, this happens whenever you strain to lift something heavy, and especially in isometric exercises. The Valsalva manoeuvre increases intra-abdominal pressure, which is necessary to stabilize your spine from within. So that's stabilizing our core. So engaging core muscles does that. But it also causes a dramatic rise in blood pressure. And again, looking at systolic range, a vigorous Valsalva manoeuvre may increase our systolic blood pressure to over 300 millimeters of mercury. Blood normally flows unimpaired through veins and arteries, but when a muscle contracts in an isometric fashion, blood flow is interrupted and pressure builds up within the circulatory system, much like when a dam is built across a fast-flowing river. Nice little analogy. The longer the isometric contraction is held, the greater the build-up of pressure. Once a contraction is relaxed, blood circulation and pressure should return to normal. But if blood pressure is already elevated, this interruption of blood flow can drive readings up to a dangerously high level, as we've seen just before. Now, with that, here we can see that I'm going to be lifting a heavier weight here with a leg press than what we were arm curls. Hence, we're likely to be holding it for longer, therefore see an increase in the systolic blood pressure. And up here with our cycling, our legs are moving, our arms aren't. So looking at the pressure within the arteries of our arms, likely therefore, because they're not moving, they're static, whereas our legs are turning over, we're likely to have a higher blood pressure than what we would within the arteries in the leg. What we're looking at here is essentially that if you have bad heart or an already elevated blood pressure, then performing exercises that use a Valsalva maneuver is probably contraindicated, meaning that you shouldn't be doing it. Looking at the different types of activity, so looking at cardio, we're really looking at dynamic, resistance, looking more so as there are going to be periods of static with each push, as people tend to hold their breath. So during cardiovascular exercises such as running, swimming, cycling, normal blood pressure responds with an increase in systolic blood pressure and no or even a possible slight decrease in diastolic blood pressure. Blood pressure response is proportional to the overall exercise intensity. So again, if we increase intensity, then we get a proportional increase in systolic blood pressure. However, if there's a drop in systolic blood pressure greater than 10 millimeters of mercury from baseline, despite increase in cardio exercise intensity, this is considered an abnormal response. So it may be an indicator of a cardiovascular disease. Now, blood pressure during resistance. There is a disproportionately high blood pressure response to resistance training. Muscles contract, so again looking at isometric, so muscles contract, no change in muscle length. Both systolic, diastolic blood pressure can increase substantially over 30% maximal effort. A couple more examples, slightly different to before, although from the same site. So here we're looking at a sustained hand grip, sustained pull-up or arm hang. Again, contraindicating those who have any abnormalities in respect to the heart. Both systolic and diastolic blood pressures elevated. So this is from a previous study where the heart rate was getting up to 320 over 250 for a double leg press. Now, again, although a double leg press or bicep curl is not an isometric contraction as such, we do tend to hold our breath or perform a Valsalva maneuver while we're completing that exercise.